The Analog Ouroboros, an audio novel, Chapter Serrano or Chapter 1. Smells like teen spirit. The smell of the future is burning meat, not barbecue, not a cookout in somebody's backyard on a Sunday in July. I mean the smell of something that used to be a person, slow cooking in a steel drum outside the razor wire. That smell followed me for 30 years. It lived in the back of my sinuses like a squatter that wouldn't leave. But the thing that woke me up that morning, the thing that yanked me out of the dark and slammed me back into the world, wasn't burning meat. It was Tide laundry detergent. I lay still. I didn't move. The brain I was operating with, the 60-something-year-old brain of a man who'd survived things no man should survive, started running diagnostics on every signal coming in from the outside world. Tide smell, real. Air temperature, warm. Not the bone-deep cold of the underground bunker. Sound. Coffee maker hissing downstairs. A TV murmuring. A sportscaster talking about something. Surface contact. Mattress. Soft. Not concrete. I opened my eyes. Ceiling. White paint. A hairline crack running northeast from the corner. A crack I'd stared at 1,000 times as a kid and completely forgotten existed until this exact second. My heart stopped for one full beat. This was my bedroom. 14 Milford Street, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I sat up straight. My head rang like a church bell. I looked at my hands. No scar tissue across the right knuckles from the IED fragment in 2007. No missing first joint on the left index finger. The skin was smooth and tight and 25 years old. From the cassette player on the desk, Kurt Cobain was screaming at me. "Load up on guns, bring your friends!" I reached over and hit the stop button. Silence. Then I heard my own breathing. Ragged. The breathing of a man who just sprinted a mile. I dragged myself out of bed. Caught my foot on a pile of clothes on the floor, 25-year-old habits, and stood in front of the full-length mirror on the closet door. The man in the mirror looked back at me. Black hair, square jaw, no silver beard, no face like a paper bag that got crumpled and then smoothed back out again. Wide shoulders, solid. A body that hadn't been carved down by 30 years of bad food and worse luck. I touched my own face, my cheekbone, my jaw, the smooth, unbroken skin of my forehead. "Jesus Christ," I said. My own voice, my young voice, nearly buckled my knees. I was back. It took exactly 7 minutes to prove to myself this wasn't a dream. I dragged a fingernail across the edge of the desk. Pain shot up. Real. I went downstairs. My mother, who died of lung cancer in 2003 in the world I'd left behind, was standing at the counter pouring coffee. She was wearing the blue-checked flannel shirt I remembered. She turned and looked at me. "Jules, you're up early. You look like a ghost." I couldn't answer. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her. She was alive. Her hair wasn't gray yet. She was alive and holding the red coffee mug I remembered all the way to the day she died. "Jules, I'm fine," I said. My throat was tight. "Just a dream." She pressed the back of her hand to my forehead. Cool. Warm. A gesture so ordinary that you forget it's precious until it's gone forever. I sat down at the kitchen table. The TV on the counter was covering the World Cup. Brazil and Italy, USA hosting. The announcer's voice was calm and easy, the voice of a world that didn't know what was coming. May 12th, 1994. I had 5 years, 7 months, and 19 days. I spent the rest of the day on the roof, ducked everyone, ducked my mother, ducked Dave Kowalski knocking on the door wanting to know if I was coming to the pool hall, ducked the whole peaceful, oblivious world. I sat up there and looked at this small town, this Rust Belt neighborhood that had been fading since the 70s but was still breathing, and I thought about what I knew. December 31st, 1999. The Polaris 9 freight train jumping the tracks, the water treatment plant at the east end of town, the yellow-brown chemical cloud rolling out across the valley like a slow exhalation. Then the silence, then the screaming. Then the things that used to be people started looking at you like meat. We called them the static, because their eyes looked like an untuned TV screen, white and grainy and hollow with nothing human left in them. A mutated prion variant. They didn't rot. They weren't slow. They ran like rabid dogs and absorbed damage like something that didn't understand it was supposed to stop. Their only weakness, noise and artificial light. They came to it like moths to a flame. I knew all of this. I'd known it for 30 years. I also knew I could stop it. The only problem was, last time, I didn't. And this time I had to ask myself, sitting on this leaky roof watching a Ford Taurus roll down the street below, whether I actually had the nerve to do what needed to be done. I closed my eyes. I listened to the crickets in the bushes below. Down the street, a door opened. A girl came out carrying a canvas grocery bag with blue stripes. She was maybe 20 years old, brown hair pulled back. She walked the way she always walked, like she was already late for something more interesting. I knew her walk. I would have known it anywhere. I had not planned on Emma Reyes being the first thing I saw on the first day back. I looked away before she could look up. Chapter 2. The Crazy Bastard on Crawford Street. The next morning I went to the bank and cleaned out my account. $5,800. Every cent I'd earned in 3 years welding at Kovach Metalworks. The teller, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked at me like I'd just told her I was planning to jump off a bridge. "You're sure about this?" Third time she'd asked. "Yeah," I said. She counted it out. Her fingers were steady, but her eyes weren't. I stuffed the envelope into the inside pocket of my Carhartt jacket and walked out. Next stop, borrowed money. Damian Price operated out of a dry cleaning shop on the south side of Milford. Everybody in the neighborhood knew what he actually did. He lent money at rates that would make a loan shark blush, and the only question he ever asked was whether you had collateral. I put up the Ford F-150. Got another $12,000. I drove to the Sears on Crawford. Not to buy anything, to buy the building. The cold storage warehouse behind the Crawford Sears had been sitting empty since 1991. The chain was bleeding out slowly. I knew that. I knew everything that was coming for the next 30 years, and the regional manager, a heavy guy named Mitchell with a Tom Selleck mustache that had given up on itself, looked at me like I was speaking Mandarin when I asked about leasing the space. "You want to lease a vacant cold storage unit? What for?" "Storage." "Storage of what?" "My stuff." 4 meetings. I paid 6 months cash up front. Mitchell held the bills and turned them over in his thick fingers and signed the lease with the face of a man who didn't understand what he'd just done. I took the key. Stood inside the space for the first time. 400 square meters. Concrete floor. Insulated walls 2 inches thick. 12-foot ceiling. 1 fluorescent tube buzzing and flickering in the far corner. The smell of old machine oil and damp. I breathed in, breathed out. This was it. This was where we would live. This was the only thing that was going to stand between us and what was coming. I pulled out the notebook I'd bought at the drugstore and started drawing a floor plan. Week 1 was reinforcement. I wasn't a contractor, but I'd spent 30 years watching what held up and what didn't. I knew which materials to trust. The main door. I ripped out the old aluminum pull-down and replaced it with a solid 16-gauge steel door, framed with poured concrete. 2 layers. The inner lock was a horizontal timber bar. 4 inches of solid white oak fitted into steel brackets mounted directly into the cinder block. Not an electronic lock, not a smart lock. Electronic locks die with the batteries. Smart locks die with the network. A timber bar doesn't die as long as the wood is sound. The side vent openings welded shut. Every one of them. I didn't need airflow I couldn't control. I ran a ventilation pipe through the roof with a manual damper that could be shut from inside in under 3 seconds. The walls. I added 2 inches of acoustic foam behind the insulation layer. Not for comfort, for silence, because the static hunted by sound. Any noise bleeding through the walls at night was an engraved invitation. 3 days of work. Mitchell poked his head in twice with his confused face. Both times I said everything was fine. Both times he nodded and went away. People believe you when you've already paid them. Week 2. First supply run. I drove to 3 different stores each day so nobody remembered my face. Canned goods first. Spam, 100 cans. Texas-style baked beans, 80 cans. Tuna, 200. Corn and kidney beans, 150 each. I didn't look at the checkout clerks. I pushed the cart and paid cash. Rice. I drove to a wholesale warehouse in Braddock. 20 50-pound bags. White rice, not brown. Brown rice goes rancid in months. White rice, stored properly, lasts 30 years. I knew this from personal experience. Salt, 100 pounds. For curing meat, for water treatment, for wound care. Sugar, 50 pounds. Pure calories when you need them most. Folgers. Coffee. 10 cases from an industrial food supplier. 30 cans per case. I thought about that for a second. Why the hell did I buy that much coffee? Then I remembered the winters. I remembered what it felt like to go without it. I bought another 5 cases. I stood in the warehouse at the end of day 14. The first corner was already a wall of stacked cans reaching almost to the ceiling. 14 days, I thought. 5 years, 6 months left. I opened a can of Spam and ate it straight with a folding knife. Salty. Dense. I'd hated the smell of it for 30 years. But that night, it tasted like a plan that might actually work. End of the first month, I ran into Dave Kowalski at Tully's Bar on Rosslyn. Dave was my oldest friend. He looked the same. A little heavier, beard thicker, wearing a faded Steelers jersey. He slid onto the stool next to me and looked at the beer I hadn't touched. "Jules, you look like you haven't slept in 3 weeks." "I sleep fine. The guys are saying you've been buying up half the canned goods in Allegheny County." He picked up a pretzel from the bowl on the bar. "What's going on with you, man?" I looked at him. This man who would be dead by 2002, shot during a home invasion that wouldn't happen if the world didn't fall apart first. My oldest friend in the world, sitting here in this bar, perfectly alive, perfectly unsuspecting. I wanted to tell him. God help me, I wanted to tell him everything. "I'm preparing," I said. "For what?" "Y2K. Dave stared at me. Then he started laughing. Not meanly, just the laugh of a man who thinks his friend has temporarily lost his mind. "Y2K, Jules, buddy, that's 5 years away. You're stockpiling for something that's probably not even going to—" "I know," I said. "Order me another beer." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he waved at the bartender. I drank my beer, said nothing else. Let him think I was paranoid. Let him think whatever he needed to think. The truth was too heavy to hand to another person. Chapter 3. Tools of a Dead World. I want to explain something about tools. In 2024, in the world I came from, everything ran on software. Guns with electronic triggers, generators with digital control panels, even the water pumps had circuit boards. And when the power grid went down and the EMP pulses from the military's last-ditch scramble fried every circuit in a 30-mile radius, all of that equipment became expensive junk. Men died because their weapon wouldn't fire. Men died because their generator wouldn't start. I was not going to make that mistake twice. The rule I built everything around was simple. If you can't fix it with a wrench and a hammer, don't count on it. Weapons first. And I want to be clear here. I wasn't building an arsenal. I was building a repair shop. I went to 3 different sporting goods stores and 1 estate sale over the course of 6 weeks and acquired the following. 2 pump-action 12-gauge shotguns. Mossberg 500 series. Simple as a fire hydrant. Tubular magazine, no electronics, no optical sights that needed batteries. You could submerge one of these in mud, pull it out and fire it inside of 30 seconds. I knew this from experience. 1 lever action. 30-30 rifle. Pre-1970, entirely mechanical. The kind of gun your grandfather could have fixed with hand tools. A Daisy Powerline air rifle converted to shoot steel ball bearings. almost silent, useful for distances under 40 feet when silence mattered. And this was the one people would have laughed at: a commercial nail gun. Paslode framing nailer, powered by a pressurized gas cartridge and a rechargeable battery pack. I bought 40 spare battery packs and 400 gas cartridges. A 3-inch galvanized framing nail at close range will put a man down. At medium range, it will definitely get the attention of something that used to be a man. No, AR-15s. Polymer frame semi-autos. Too many moving parts, too many failure points. I also bought 4 compound bows and 1,000 carbon fiber arrows. Reusable, silent, no ammunition supply chain required. Power: 2 Honda EX-1000 generators. Gas-powered, the older, steel frame type, not the inverter models that hadn't been invented yet, but quiet enough, and more importantly, simple enough that I could rebuild the carburetor with a flathead screwdriver and parts from any small engine shop in Pennsylvania. I bought enough fuel stabilizer additive to treat 400 gallons of stored gasoline. Fuel stabilizer prevents the varnish buildup that kills a carburetor after 6 months. Without it, you're storing useless liquid. With it, the gas stays combustible for 2 years. I bought 200 gallons of premium, unleaded in 30-gallon drums, and treated every drop. 2 6-volt golf cart batteries wired in series to create a 12-volt bank, not deep cycle marine batteries. Golf cart batteries are built for repeated deep discharge cycles, and they last longer. I found them at a golf equipment liquidation sale for $40 each, a hand-cranked battery charger and a set of jumper cables. A 12-volt inverter to run low-draw appliances. A Maglite 3D flashlight for every person who would eventually be living in this space. Not because they're special, because the aluminum barrel doubles as a club, and the lens is standard enough that spare bulbs could be found in any hardware store in America for the next 20 years. And batteries. Jesus, the batteries! Energizer Industrial Alkaline, the ones in the black packaging they sell to hospitals and fire departments. I bought them by the case. 1,000 AAA 500C, 300D. The alkaline chemistry holds charge for 10 years if stored at room temperature. I put them in sealed plastic bins, labeled by type, stacked against the north wall. The library runs started in September. I don't think people understand what it meant to research something in 1994. You couldn't Google it. You couldn't watch a YouTube tutorial. You went to the library. You looked up the book in the card catalog. You found the shelf. You read it. You took notes by hand, or you fed coins into the photocopier. I spent $300 on photocopies over the next 4 months. Field surgery. I found a military field medicine manual from the Army surplus store on Penn and photocopied the entire thing. Appendectomy procedure, tourniquet application, wound irrigation, improvised airway management. I didn't know if I could actually do any of it, but I knew that having the paper and not needing it was better than needing it and not having it. Antibiotic production. You can grow penicillin from bread mold if you know what you're doing. I found 3 papers on this in the university library's science periodical section, photocopied them, brought them home, read them until I could repeat the procedure from memory. Water treatment, municipal supply would fail within 72 hours of the collapse. I photocopied a Red Cross manual on improvised filtration and disinfection. Bleach ratios, boiling times, solar disinfection using clear plastic bottles, maps. I went to a gas station and bought a Rand McNally Road Atlas of Pennsylvania, folded and creased and laminated in plastic at the Kinko's on Forbes. Then I went to the county recorder's office and hand-copied the topographic maps of the surrounding terrain. Every creek, every ridgeline, every road that wasn't on the commercial atlas. No GPS wasn't in civilian hands yet and wouldn't be properly accessible anyway when the infrastructure collapsed. The paper was all I had. I sat at my kitchen table some nights looking at the stacks of photocopied paper and thought about how insane this must look from the outside. Some 25-year-old factory worker sitting in a 2-bedroom house in Pittsburgh, surrounded by survival manuals and canned goods and barometric pressure charts. I was the crazy bastard on Crawford Street. I had earned that. The first time Emma Reyes actually spoke to me was in October. I was loading a dolly with 60-pound rice sacks in the parking lot of the wholesale warehouse in Braddock. My truck was backed up to the loading dock, and I was working alone because I was always working alone. A car pulled up next to mine, a beat-up Toyota Corolla with a cracked rear taillight, and a woman got out. I didn't look up. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you know if they sell to individuals here or just businesses?" I looked up. Emma Reyes, 20 years old, brown hair and a short ponytail. Wearing a green canvas jacket that was too big for her, the sleeves rolled up twice. Her eyes were dark brown, the same dark brown I had memorized over 30 years and a lifetime's worth of grief. My brain went completely offline for approximately 2 seconds. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out normal. I don't know how. Individuals are fine. You just need a minimum order, $25 minimum. "Oh, good." She smiled. Not at me specifically, just the smile of someone who'd just solved a small problem. "I'm trying to make tamales for about 40 people, and I can't find masa harina in any quantity smaller than—" She gestured at a 50-pound bag. "Well, that'll make a lot of tamales. It's for the church fundraiser." A pause. "I'm Emma." "Jewel?" She shook my hand. Her grip was firm. I let go before I held on too long. "You're stocking up for something?" she asked, nodding at the mountain of rice bags in my truck bed. "Just a good deal," I said. She nodded, headed toward the warehouse door, then stopped and looked back. "Jules, if you're actually prepping for Y2K, don't be embarrassed. My uncle's been doing it for 2 years and he's got the most organized basement in Pittsburgh." She smiled again. "See you around." She went inside. I stood in the parking lot in the October cold and thought about how this was the moment I should walk away from. How every interaction I had with her was a step toward the cliff edge I'd already fallen off once before. I loaded the last rice bag into the truck. I thought about her uncle's organized basement. I thought about what was coming. I drove home and unloaded everything alone. Chapter 4. The Weight of What You Know. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes with the knowing. Not the regular loneliness, not the kind where you're at a party and you feel like you're watching it through glass. This was something colder, more precise. Every time I turned on the news and watched them talk about the peace dividend, about the economy humming, about the future looking bright, I felt the weight of it sitting on my chest. They didn't know. None of them knew, and I couldn't tell anyone. I'd thought about it. In the first weeks, I'd turned it over constantly. Go to the government? Tell them what? That a freight train was going to derail on New Year's Eve 1999 and release a chemical agent that would cause a prion pandemic that would collapse civilization? Based on what evidence? My word, the word of a 25-year-old factory worker with no scientific credentials and a warehouse full of canned goods? They would have committed me before I finished the first sentence. Go to the press? Same problem. Plus the additional problem of potentially tipping off whoever was responsible for loading that train. And in 2024, right before I stepped into the machine, I still didn't know for certain whether the contamination was an accident or intentional. I didn't want to spook anyone into moving the operations. So I said nothing. I worked. She prepared. I carried the weight alone. By December 1994, the Sears cold storage had become something. I had mapped the entire interior on graph paper and built a system. North wall, dry goods, rice, flour, sugar, salt, in sealed 5-gallon buckets with oxygen absorber packets inside. South wall, canned goods, organized by category and rotation date, oldest in front. East wall, tools, weapons, medical supplies, and the battery bank. West wall, fuel storage, treated gasoline in sealed drums away from the batteries. Tato, center of the space, 2 full-size wooden pallets I'd turned into sleeping platforms. Not for comfort, for insulation from the concrete floor. Cold. Concrete pulls body heat out at a rate that will keep you awake and eventually kill you. Wooden pallet plus 2-inch foam pad plus sleeping bag equals survival. The ventilation system, a 4-inch PVC pipe through the roof with a charcoal filter on the exterior end and a manual damper on the interior, cracked 3 inches in normal times, sealed completely when the noise discipline required it. A hand pump water filtration unit mounted to the wall, plumbed into a 200-gallon rain catchment tank I'd installed in the roof drainage. Backup was a 50-gallon drum of stored municipal water treated with bleach, rotated every 6 months. Ham radio. This was essential. Commercial broadcast and cellular would die within days of the collapse. I knew this. But ham radio runs on the 40-meter band and doesn't need infrastructure. As long as someone somewhere had a radio and a power source, you could hear them. I bought a Kenwood TS430S, studied for and passed the amateur radio technician license test, and installed a 40-foot wire antenna along the roofline of the warehouse. I also bought a handheld Motorola portable, the kind with the long rubber antenna, thick as a brick, built like it was designed to survive falling off a truck. I also bought 2 bicycle-powered battery chargers. When the gasoline ran out, and eventually it would, pedaling would keep the battery bank alive. My mother asked me in January if I was in trouble. We were having dinner. She'd made the pot roast she always made on winter Sundays, the one with the carrots cut thick and the potatoes turning soft at the edges. I was eating and she was watching me with the particular look she had, the one that didn't ask anything out loud but said everything. "I'm not in trouble," I said. "You're gone all day. You're not going out with your friends. Dave says you're spending all your money on—" She paused. "On canned food." "I'm fine, Mom." "Jules." She set her fork down. "Is it drugs?" "No, Fiwa. Is it a woman?" I thought about brown eyes and an oversized green jacket. "No." "Then what?" I looked at her. This woman who raised me alone after my father left, who worked double shifts at the hospital laundry to keep the lights on, who never once asked me to be anything other than what I was. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to hand her some portion of this weight. "I just think things are going to get bad," I said finally, "in a few years, and I want to be ready." She looked at me for a long time. Then she picked her fork back up. "How bad?" she said quietly. "Bad enough that having food and water and a safe place to sleep is the difference between living and not." She ate a forkful of potatoes. She chewed. She set the fork down again. "Show me the place," she said. I took her to the Sears warehouse on a Tuesday afternoon. She walked the whole space, slowly looking at everything. She didn't say anything for about 10 minutes. Then she turned to me. "You built this yourself?" "Yeah." "The door?" "Poured the frame myself. Steel door from a salvage yard." She touched the canned goods wall, read a few labels, walked to the east wall and looked at the medical kit, the one I'd built from scratch using the photocopied field surgery manual as a reference. She turned back to me. "What kind of bad?" she asked. "War? Tornado? What are we talking about?" "Disease," I said. "Something that spreads fast through water, hits the nervous system, makes people violent, dangerous to be around." She absorbed this the way she absorbed everything, without drama, without theater. Just a slight tightening around her eyes. "Do I need to move in here?" "Not yet. But when I tell you it's time, you need to move fast. Hours, not days, okay?" She nodded. "Okay." She went home. Made pot roast the next Sunday as if nothing had happened, never told a soul. That was my mother. That was the only person in the world I ever told the truth to, and she believed me without asking for proof. I think about that a lot. Chapter 5. Prepper's Gospel. Spring 1995. I quit Kovacs Metalworks. The overtime wasn't worth it anymore. I needed the time. I took a job driving a delivery truck 3 days a week, cash, no questions, and spent the other 4 days building. The second floor mezzanine was 6 months of work. I built it out of dimensional lumber, 2x10 joists, sistered at 12-inch intervals, such as B subfloor, construction adhesive at every joint. It gave me 150 square feet of sleeping and storage space above the main floor, accessible by a fixed wooden ladder bolted to the north wall. Up there, I stashed the most critical redundancies: backup medical supplies, a second radio, the photocopied manuals in waterproof Ziploc bags, and a small wooden box that held everything I needed to remember about the next 4 years. The box was locked. The key was on a cord around my neck. I want to talk about what it actually takes to prepare for the end of the world in 1995. There's no forum. There's no YouTube video. There's no community of guys in the comments section sharing their loadout lists. There's the library. There's trial and error. There's making things with your hands and then trying to break them to see where they fail. No, I learned to cure meat from a book I found at a church rummage sale. The process for curing venison with pink salt is the same today as it was 150 years ago. Salt, nitrite, thyme, airflows. I ran the first test batch with pork shoulder bought from the butcher on South Highland. Packed it in a mixture of coarse kosher salt, brown sugar, and curing salt in a ratio of 12:1 to 1/4. Left it in a cooler for 8 days. Hung it to dry in the cold storage for another 2 weeks. It was the best thing I'd eaten in months. Not because it tasted good, it was salty and dense and chewy in a way that made your jaw work, but because it lasted. Because I'd made it myself from materials I could source without electricity or refrigeration. I learned to filter water through a combination of sand, gravel, activated charcoal, and ceramic candles. I tested the output with strips from a water testing kit bought at the hardware store. I failed the first 3 configurations. The 4th passed on every metric. I learned basic carpentry, basic plumbing, how to tap a pipe, how to solder copper fittings, how to fix a leaking valve seat. None of it was glamorous. All of it was necessary. By the end of 1995, I had a space that could sustain 4 people indefinitely, without contact with the outside world. I was building for 4, my mother, myself, and 2 people I hadn't committed to yet, because committing to them meant making a decision I wasn't ready to make. The summer of 1995, Emma Reyes moved into the neighborhood. She rented the upstairs apartment in the Kowalski duplex on House Street, 3 blocks from my mother's house. I found this out because my mother mentioned it at Sunday dinner. The Reyes girl, Emma, she moved into Tom Kowalski's upstairs, working at the hospital in the records department. Very polite. She brought your father's mother cookies. I said. She asked about you, my mother said, with a precision that told me she'd been holding this information for maximum impact. I drank my coffee. Jewel. Yeah. You know her? Met her once. My mother said nothing for a moment, then she has kind eyes. She did, she always had. And that was the problem. I ran into Emma at the hardware store in September. She was in the fastener aisle looking at toggle bolts with the focused expression of someone who had a problem they were determined to solve. I came around the corner with a basket full of 2x4 connector plates and nearly ran into her. Jules. She recognized me immediately. You're the tamale warehouse guy. That's me. What are you building now? I looked at the connector plates. Shelving. She looked at my basket, at the 40 connector plates, the box of 3-inch structural screws, the 2 carriage bolts. That's a lot of shelving. It's a big project. She smiled. It hit me the same way it always did, like stepping into a warm room from outside in January. Immediate, physical. I'm trying to hang a curtain rod, she said, and the drywall anchor keeps spinning. Is that a toggle bolt thing or a different thing? Spinning means the anchor's too small for the hole. You need a snap toggle. I reached past her and pulled the right item from the hook. This kind, the blue one. You know your hardware. I know what breaks. She held up the toggle bolt and looked at it. How do you know all this stuff? You seem like... She stopped. Like what? Like someone who's been somewhere worse than Pittsburgh and came back with a lot of useful skills. I didn't answer that. She bought the snap toggles. I bought my connector plates. We walked out at the same time and stood in the September afternoon for a moment. Thanks for the help, she said. Anytime. She walked toward her car. Then she stopped, turned around, and looked back at me with an expression I Couldn't quite read. Jules, are you okay? I mean, actually okay. You seem like... She paused again, chose the words carefully. You seem like you're carrying something heavy. I looked at her. 23 years old, dark eyes, the green canvas jacket again, the sleeves still rolled twice. She was looking at me the way she always looked at things that interested her, directly, without flinching, waiting patiently for the real answer. I'm fine, I said. Go hang your curtain rod. She smiled one more time and got in her car. I stood in the hardware store parking lot and realized my hands were shaking, not from a fear, from the effort it took not to tell her everything. Chapter 6. Emma, I want to say something about loving a person you've already watched die. There are no words for it. None. Every book and every song that's ever been written about love is about the fear of loss, the anticipation of absence. What they don't write about, what nobody writes about because nobody's ever had to, is what it's like to have already been through the absence and come back to the presence. To see her walking down the street and know every line of her face the way you know the rooms of your own house, to know that she takes her coffee black in winter and with cream in summer, that she argues with herself under her breath when she's calculating something, that she laughs at things that happen slightly before other people realize they're funny. To know all of this and know that she doesn't know you yet. That was the winter of 1995 and most of 1996. I kept the distance. I thought that was the right choice. I was here to prevent the end of the world. Not to fall back into the same fire that had already burned me down to nothing once before. But here's the problem with keeping distance from Emma Reyes. She didn't honor it. She came over with a crock pot of pozole in November because my mother mentioned to her mother, they'd started talking in the church parking lot, that I'd been working 18-hour days and probably wasn't feeding myself. She knocked on my door at 7 in the evening while I was reviewing a third-generation schematic for the water filtration upgrade. I opened the door. She was holding a crock pot with a kitchen towel and wearing the green jacket, and looking at me with the straightforward patience she had. Your mother told my mother you weren't eating. This is pozole, my grandmother's recipe. You can keep the crock pot. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She held it out. Take it. I took it. She looked past me into the house, at the schematic on the table, the stacks of papers, the 3-ring binders, and the topographic maps. Her eyes moved across it all, calmly, the way they moved across everything. What is all that? Plans? For the warehouse thing? I looked at her. You know about the warehouse? Your mom told my mom. A slight smile. Jules, everybody knows. The guys at the bar call you the Y2K prepper. Dave Kowalski told me you've got enough spam in there to last a decade. I looked at the floor. I'm not laughing at you, she said. My uncle's been prepping for 10 years. He's the most prepared man in Pittsburgh. She paused. Can I come in? I should have said no. I said yes. She spent 2 hours looking at everything. Not the schematic, the books. She went through my shelves the way readers do, reading spines, pulling things out, reading the back cover, putting them back. Field medicine, water purification, radio communication, structural reinforcement, animal husbandry. She didn't comment. She just looked. Finally, she sat down across the table from me and put her hands flat on the surface and looked at me directly. Tell me what you actually think is going to happen, she said. I told you. Y2K, infrastructure collapse, supply chain. That's the cover story, she said. That's what you tell people so they don't put you in a hospital. I'm asking what you actually think. I looked at her. She looked back at me, patient, waiting. I told her approximately 30% of the truth. Enough to be real, not enough to require an explanation of where the information came from. I told her I believed the water infrastructure was more vulnerable than anyone understood. That I believed a contamination event, chemical or biological, was more likely than anyone was admitting. That I had reason to believe the window was years, not decades. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. What kind of contamination? Something neurological, something that disrupts the prefrontal cortex, leaves the lower brain, the survival instinct, intact and removes everything that moderates it. She absorbed this. So people, she said slowly, would still function, move, respond to stimuli, but without judgment, without recognition, without the capacity to stop. She nodded once, the nod of someone who has worked at a hospital and has a concept framework for what I was describing. And you think this happens when? Before 2001, she looked at her hands on the table, then at me. You should have more than one person helping you with this, she said. This is too much for one person. I'm fine on my own. No, you're not. She said it without heat, without argument. Just as a statement of observable fact. You're exhausted. You haven't slept properly in months. You're doing everything alone, and it's making you worse at all of it. She stood up and picked up her jacket. I'll come back on Saturday. I know basic first aid. I can help with the medical kit inventory. She left before I could argue. She came back on Saturday, and the Saturday after that. Chapter 7. The Cost of Everything. 1996 became 1997, became 1998. You can compress time when you're working, when every day has a list, and the list is always shorter than the work required. When you fall asleep in the same clothes you were working in and wake up 4 hours later and start again. The warehouse grew. We added a second water tank, another 200 gallons, plumbed from a second roof drainage point. We added a seed bank, vacuum-sealed packets of non-hybrid vegetable seeds stored at cellar temperature, rotated annually. Tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, snap beans, winter squash. If we had to, we could eventually grow food. The timeline for that was 5 to 10 years out. Better to have it. We added a full woodworking bench along the south wall with hand tools only. Chisels, planes, saws, files, a brace and bit drill set. No power tools that couldn't run on the battery bank. A sharpening stone. Extra saw blades wrapped in oil paper. Emma took over the medical supply organization. She brought the institutional knowledge from the hospital records department. The way she cross-referenced everything, the methodical labeling, the color-coded expiration dating system. What I'd had was functional. What she made was a system that could be used at 3 in the morning by someone who was frightened and injured and running on no sleep. I watched her do this. I watched her sit on the warehouse floor with a clipboard and 300 individual items spread around her in a careful grid, building order out of chaos with a level of patience that I had never once in my life possessed. I thought about what she didn't know, about what I was asking her to help build without telling her what it was really for. The guilt of that was a low-grade constant, like a bad tooth that doesn't hurt enough to fix until suddenly it does. I told her more in the fall of 1997. Not the time travel, not the mechanics of what had happened or where I'd come from, but I told her about the prion variant, the neurological pattern, the specific behavioral characteristics of what the infected would become. I told her about the noise sensitivity, about how the static were drawn to sound and light with a ferocity that bordered on religious, and about why every system in the warehouse was designed around silence. She sat with it. She always sat with things. She didn't panic and she didn't dismiss. How do you know all this? She asked finally. The specifics. The prion pattern, the light sensitivity. This isn't general Y2K theory. This is specific. I know it the way some people know things, I said. You'd have to trust me on the source. She looked at me for a long time. Do you have a way to verify any of it? She said. Any of the specific mechanisms? No. But you're sure? I'm sure. Another long look. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Then we planned for it. That was it. No interrogation. No demand for proof. She decided to believe me and moved on to the practical implications. I have thought about that moment every single day since. She trusted me. In the world I came from, in the world I made, the trust cost her everything. My mother moved into the warehouse in January 1998. Not permanently. She kept the house on Milford, But she had a cot on the mezzanine and a go bag packed and by the door, and she came by twice a week to rotate stock and check the battery bank and update herself on the system. She took the ham radio course from me over 3 weekends and passed her technician's exam with 94%. She was 61 years old. She learned the NATO phonetic alphabet in a single afternoon. "Alpha Bravo Charlie," she said at the kitchen table, running her finger down the laminated card I'd made her. "Foxtrot Golf Hotel. Jules, why couldn't they just use normal letters? Because Foxtrot sounds different on a scratchy radio line than Freddie does." She kept going. "Tango Uniform Victor. You know, your father never prepared for anything in his life, and look how that worked out. You're doing great, Mom. Whiskey X-Ray Yankee Zulu." She put the card down. "I'm getting a beer." 18 months left. I started running drills. Lockdown drill. The signal is 2 short knocks. Pause, 2 more. Everyone inside within 90 seconds. Timer runs from signal to all doors secured. Target time, 60 seconds. First attempt with all 3 of us, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. By the end of the month, 51 seconds. Noise discipline. 1 hour of complete silence per week. No talking, no unnecessary movement. Accustom the nervous system to the practice. The idea was to normalize the feeling of being very, very quiet for a very long time, so that when we had to do it for real, it didn't feel like suffocation. Medical emergency drill. 1 person plays the casualty. The other 2 work through the protocol. Wound assessment, airway check, tourniquet application, wound irrigation, splinting, suturing. We practiced on pork belly from the butcher, which is roughly analogous to human tissue. Emma was better at the suturing than I was. Her hands were steadier. Contact protocols. If someone outside asked about the warehouse, contractors, neighbors, anyone, the answer was always the same. Storage for a small business, surplus inventory, nothing interesting. The drills felt like theater sometimes. I stood there timing 60 seconds on a stopwatch while my mother and Emma moved through the motions and thought about how this was either the most important thing any of us would ever do, or I was slowly losing my mind. I held on to the first option. Chapter 8. The Mathematics of December-November, 1999. 7 weeks left. I sat at the workbench in the warehouse with a yellow legal pad and a Bic pen. I had 40 Bic pens, no kidding, 40, and went over the list for the 100th time. Food, 18 months of full calories for 4 people, plus emergency ration margin of 20%. Water, 450 gallons stored, plus 2 functioning collection systems, plus filtration capacity of 400 gallons per week at full operation. Medical, 12 months of core antibiotics. Veterinary amoxicillin, which requires no prescription and is chemically identical to human amoxicillin. Wound closure supplies for 30 procedures, 2 months of pain management. Prenatal vitamins, because you plan for everything. Fuel, 180 gallons remaining after 2 years of generator testing and maintenance. At the projected usage rate, 6 hours per day for heating in winter, 2 hours otherwise. That was approximately 400 days. Weapons and ammunition, 1,400 rounds of 12-gauge buckshot, 800 rounds of 30-30, 4,200 steel ball bearings for the air rifle, 60 nailgun gas cartridges remaining, 200 crossbow bolts, communications, ham radio operational, Kenwood, and 2 handhelds all tested and functional. Spare parts for the Kenwood stored in an anti-static bag. My mother was ready. She had the go bag packed and had practiced the route to the warehouse on foot twice. Once in daylight, once in the dark with only a flashlight just in case. Emma was ready. She'd drilled every protocol until she could run them half asleep. And I was ready, or I told myself I was. Here's what I didn't write on the yellow legal pad. Here's the thing I sat with alone at the workbench at 2 in the morning while the fluorescent light hummed above me. The plan required me to be at the railroad trestle on Conestoga Road at 11:47 p.m. on December 31st, 1999. The Polaris 9 was scheduled to pass at 11:52. The trestle was the only point on the route where a controlled demolition would take the train off the tracks before it reached the water treatment plant. I had the materials: 48 ounces of ANFO, ammonium nitrate, and fuel oil, the same mixture Timothy McVeigh used, simple enough to source from a farm supply store. Packed into 4 sealed steel tubes I'd welded myself. Blasting caps from a mining supply company, ordered under a false business name. 12-volt detonator wired to a Motorola two-way radio receiver. I could trigger it from 500 feet. I had run the demolition sequence 100 times in my head. The charges placed at the 2 primary support columns. The detonation sequence to bring the western span down across the tracks. The Polaris 9 hitting the debris field at speed. Derailment, the chemical tanks. The ones I was told in 2024 carried the compound that started everything, rupturing on impact and burning rather than venting into the water table. I had run it 100 times, and every time it came out clean. Every time except one. The one where Emma Reyes was on the trestle when I detonated it. I didn't know why she would be there. She had no reason to be there. Her apartment was 6 miles away. I had given her explicit instructions for New Year's Eve. Stay inside, stay quiet, wait for my signal on the radio. But here was the thing I had learned. In 30 years of watching the world go wrong in ways that no one predicted, the one thing you don't plan for is always the one thing that happens. I sat at the workbench at 2 in the morning with the yellow legal pad and the Bic pen and tried to think of a reason that Emma Reyes would be on the Conestoga Road trestle at 11:47 p.m. on New Year's Eve. I couldn't find one, but I could not convince myself it was impossible. And that was the problem. Chapter 9. New Year's Eve, 1999. It snowed that afternoon. Not the blizzard kind. The quiet kind. Fat, soft flakes that came straight down in the absence of wind. By 4 o'clock, the street in front of the warehouse was an inch deep and still going. The kind of snow that muffles sound. That makes the world feel padded and gentle and slightly unreal. I had everything staged and ready. The charges were in a canvas military surplus bag, the kind with the double buckle closure. The detonator was in a separate case. The radio receiver tested and confirmed, working at 600 feet that morning. I had a headlamp, 2 mag lights, a folding knife, my radio handset, and the Mossberg 500 with 5 shells in the tube. My mother was in the warehouse. She'd come by at noon with a pot of soup and a look that said she knew something was different about today. I'd told her, stay in, stay quiet, lock it from inside, do not open the door until you hear my voice on the radio and I give you the word. She said, come back. I said, I will. Emma was at her apartment. I'd spoken to her at noon. Brief, businesslike. Stay inside. Radio check at midnight. If I don't call by 12:15, don't wait for me. Go directly to the warehouse and lock in. She said, Jules. I said, I know, just do what I said. She said, come back. Same words as my mother. Different wait. I left at 9:30 p.m. The drive to Conestoga Road took 40 minutes on snow-slick streets. Downtown was alive. I passed 2 bars with people spilling out onto the sidewalk, noise and music and colored lights splashing across the snow. Someone had a boombox playing Prince. The countdown clocks in the bar windows said 2.5 hours to midnight, to Y2K, to the thing everyone was anxious about but expected to be nothing. Thought about that, the collective weight of 2.5 billion people going to sleep tonight expecting tomorrow to be fine. The trust that civilization runs on. The 10,000 interlocking assumptions that the lights will come on, that the water will be clean, that the systems holding everything together will hold. I turned off the main road. The trestle was on the eastern edge of the county industrial zone, where the rail line crossed a 40-foot drop above Conestoga Creek. In the summer, there was traffic on this road. Tonight, nothing. Just the snow and the darkness and the sound of the train yard half a mile east, the distant clanking and sighing of freight cars being assembled. I parked on the service road below the trestle and killed the headlights. The trestle was older than anyone currently living. Iron latticework, Victorian vintage. The kind of thing that had been repainted so many times, the layers of paint were structurally significant. I'd walked it 3 times in daylight to pick my charge placement. I knew every bolt. I pulled the canvas bag out of the truck and started walking up the slope toward the tracks. The snow had stopped. Above the cloud cover, the moon was moving, and its light came through diffuse and even, turning everything the same pale gray-white. I could hear the creak below, the particular cold sound of water moving under a skin of ice. I reached the trestle, stood at the north end, looked down the track bed stretching east. 11:17 p.m., 35 minutes. I worked by feel and headlamp, keeping the beam low to avoid light bleed. First charge placement, the northwest primary column, 15 feet below track level. I climbed down the maintenance ladder, bolted to the steel frame, found the attachment point I'd identified on the daytime reconnaissance, and secured the first tube with heavy-duty zip ties around the column flange. Good steel contact, clean placement. 11:28. Second charge, the opposite column, southeast primary, mirrored placement. I was moving fast now. My fingers were cold despite the work gloves. The temperature had dropped hard after the snow stopped, and I was aware of the time with every heartbeat. It's 11:34. I climbed back up to track level and began unspooling the detonator wire from the main trigger case, walking back along the track bed toward the north end of the trestle, feeding wire, keeping it close to the rail where it wouldn't be visible. 11:40. 12 minutes. I was at the far end of the wire run, 300 feet from the charges, when I turned on the detonator receiver and did the final systems check. Green light, circuit complete, both charges showing continuity. 11:43. I stood still, listened. The freight yards to the east had gone quiet. Then I heard it, the low rumble of a locomotive working up to speed. Far away yet, but distinctive. The specific bass note of the Polaris 9. A 2-engine consist, pulling 47 cars. 9 minutes. I took the detonator handset out of the case. Flipped up the safety cover on the trigger switch. I would wait until the locomotive was on the trestle approach, close enough to guarantee the derailment, far enough that the crew had time to see what was happening and apply the emergency brakes. The crew would survive. The train would not make it through. The water treatment plant would be safe. 11:45, I raised the handset, and then the headlights came on. There's a secondary spur line that runs beneath the main trestle. Not above it on the same elevation, below it, at road grade, where the service road crosses the spur track on a standard flat crossing. 2 rails set into asphalt. A blinking amber warning light that had been malfunctioning since October, and nobody had come to fix it. I had walked that crossing a dozen times in daylight reconnaissance. I had never once thought about it as a problem. Below the trestle, on the service road, a pair of headlights swept around the curve and stopped. Toyota Corolla. Cracked rear tail light. It stopped because it was on the crossing. Front wheels over the first rail. The rear wheels had come off the road and dropped into the drainage rut at the crossing edge. Black ice, invisible under a dusting of fresh snow. And the car sat at a 10-degree angle, passenger side down, front axle pinned between the rail and the asphalt lip. Stuck. Directly below, the western trestle span. The western span that I had 12 pounds of ANFO attached to. My brain stopped for 2 full seconds, not processing, just stopped, the way a machine stops when it receives contradictory inputs simultaneously. She got out of the car, green canvas jacket. She'd left it running. I could see the exhaust from the tailpipe curling white in the dark. She walked around to the front, saw the axle situation, and crouched to look at it. She had followed me. She'd told me once, months earlier, that something about my behavior the last few weeks had felt wrong. Wound up, distracted, like a man building towards something he wouldn't talk about. She'd followed my truck. She didn't know she was directly below 40 feet of Victorian ironwork that I was about to bring down on top of her. The locomotive horn sounded from the east, far away, maybe 7 minutes. I stood on the trestle, with the detonator handset in my hand, and I did the arithmetic. The detonation would drop the western span straight down, 40 feet of iron latticework, probably 60 tons, collapsing onto the service road. The Corolla would cease to exist as a recognizable object. Emma Reyes would cease to exist as a living person. The math was not complicated. The argument for pressing the button anyway was 4 billion people. The Polaris 9 gets through, the water plant goes, the cloud rolls out, 4 billion people die slow and wrong over the next decade while civilization tears itself apart. One woman against 4 billion. The math isn't even close. I had thought about this exact scenario, not this exact form. I hadn't planned for her car, for the ice, for the spur crossing. But I had thought about what I would do if something stood between me and the detonator trigger on that night. I had told myself quietly and with great certainty that I would press the button regardless, that I was not the kind of man who let the world burn for a single person. I was wrong about what kind of man I was. I threw the handset, not because I was thinking, because my arm had already made the decision while my brain was still running the arithmetic. Over the embankment to my right, 40 feet down to the creek bed below, I heard it punch through the ice and go dark. The radio receiver was wet. The circuit was dead. The charges would not fire, and then I was moving. Back down the track bed, north ladder, down the rungs with no care for the ice. My palms hit the frozen steel and slipped, and I caught the next rung with my forearm instead, and it tore the jacket sleeve open. But I was moving, down and onto the service road at a dead sprint. Emma heard me coming. She stood up from where she'd been crouching at the front axle and turned. "Jules, get in the car." I was already at the passenger side, getting my shoulder under the front quarter panel. "Get in and steer. Don't ask. Now." She got in. She didn't ask. I pushed. The car wasn't going to move by hand. I knew that before I tried. But I wasn't trying to move it. I was at the Corolla's front corner with my hands on the bumper, looking at the axle, looking at the rail, looking at the ice. The Motorola handset on my belt, not the detonator receiver, the network radio. I yanked it out, keyed it. "Curtis, you there?" Static. Then, "Go ahead." "Hoita." "I need you to tell me which way to rock a car off a rail on black ice, and I need the answer in about 30 seconds. A pause. Then Curtis's voice came back with the flat efficiency of a man who had learned never to ask why first. "Front wheels. Jack the stuck side. If you don't have a jack, use the tire iron as a lever under the frame rail and get body weight behind it." Well, I had a tire iron in the truck. The truck was 100 yards up the road. The locomotive horn again. Closer now, maybe 4 minutes. I looked at the Corolla. I looked at the rail. The spur crossing ran perpendicular to the service road. The car had slid in at an angle. The front driver's side wheel was locked against the near rail. But there was maybe 4 inches of clearance between the tire and the far rail on the passenger side. If she reversed at full throttle with the wheel cranked hard right, "Emma, full reverse, wheel all the way right, don't correct, go." She went. The tires screamed on ice. The car rocked. The front end ground against the rail with a sound like something important breaking. The rear slid further right. Harder. She floored it. The front passenger wheel caught the asphalt shoulder on the far side of the crossing. The axle came free of the near rail with a metallic bang that I felt in my chest. The car lurched backward off the crossing and stopped half in the drainage ditch. Emma opened the door. The locomotive horn hit us like a wall of sound. The headlight was around the curve now, visible. Close. "Go," I said. She pulled forward off the ditch and onto the service road. I ran to the passenger side and got in. She was already moving before I had the door closed. She drove north on the service road, away from the crossing, picking up speed. Behind us, the Polaris 9 crossed the spur at full speed. The crossing flashed past in the rearview mirror, 2 lines of light and a thunder that shook the windows. And then the train was on the main trestle above us, 47 cars doing 35 miles an hour. And the road shook and the car shook. And the sound was inside the car, and inside my chest, and inside my teeth. And then it was past. And then it was gone. To the east, toward the water treatment plant. Emma drove with both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road and didn't say anything for a long time. And then, 30 seconds later, the sky to the east lit up. Yellow-orange, chemical burn, not a fuel fire. The color was wrong, more acidic, more aggressive. And then the cloud began to rise. Brown-yellow, dense, moving slowly north on the air that funneled along the creek valley. Emma stared at it. "Jules," she said again, very quietly. "I know," I said. "Was that—" "The train, the water plant." My voice was level. "I don't know how. I need you to listen to me very carefully. We need to get to the warehouse right now. Right now. We do not stop. We do not get out of the car. We do not open the windows. You drive and I'll navigate." She looked at the burning sky for another moment. Then she put the car in gear. She didn't ask why I'd thrown the detonator. She never once asked me that. Chapter 10. The first night. We got to the warehouse at 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes before midnight. 2 minutes before Y2K. 2 minutes before the rest of the world started finding out that the year 2000 had something worse than a software glitch. My mother was at the window when we pulled up. Not the main window, which I'd sealed, but the small monitoring aperture I'd cut in the steel door with a view line to the street. I heard the bolts go back. The door opened. We were inside in under 10 seconds. I threw the timber bar. The three of us stood in the warm, chemical-smelling air of the warehouse and listened to the town outside. For the first few minutes, nothing. The distant sound of New Year's celebration, music, fireworks at the waterfront. Then the fireworks faded. The music continued for a while. Then the music stopped. And then the screaming started. Not close, far, but distinct. Multiple voices, then more, then the kind of escalating sound that you recognize on a biological level, the sound that your nervous system was built over 1,000,000 years to respond to, the sound that says something is going very wrong in the vicinity of your species. My mother sat down on the pallet. She looked very calm. She had the Mossberg across her knees. Emma stood next to me at the monitoring aperture. Neither of us touched. We just stood there and listened to the end of the world beginning outside. "How long?" she said quietly. "Before it's fully collapsed?" "Weeks. The infrastructure hangs on for a little while. People try to manage it. The hospital will be overwhelmed in 48 hours. Emergency services will be unreachable inside a week." "Social order?" I stopped. "How long?" she said again. "Before we can leave safely? Months, a year, maybe more. Depends on how many people convert and how fast." She absorbed this. "The people outside," she said, "the ones who are affected, can they be brought back?" "No." She was quiet. "Do they know what they are?" "No. That's the one mercy. There's nothing left in there to know anything." She stood with this for a long moment. Outside, the screaming had spread north toward the residential streets. A car alarm went off somewhere and triggered a sound like a flock of starlings moving, the cascade of movement from everything in earshot responding to the sudden noise. Emma pulled back from the aperture. "Noise," she said. "Yeah." She moved to the power panel I'd installed against the east wall, the master cutoff for the interior lighting, and looked at me. "Do we go dark?" I looked at my watch. 12:04 a.m., January 1st, 2000. "We go dark," I said. She cut the lights. We stood in the dark. In the silence of the warehouse, in the smell of Tide and canned goods and machine oil, in the careful, airtight box I'd spent 5 years and everything I had building. Outside, the world I'd failed to save was coming apart. My mother's hand found mine in the dark. She didn't say anything. She just held on. Chapter 11. What the Dark Teaches. The first weeks were the worst because of the sounds. I want to be precise about this, because when people in the old world, the world before, imagined apocalyptic scenarios, they imagined a certain kind of silence, a quietness, the quietness of emptiness. What they got wrong was that the end of the world is deafeningly loud. During the day, the static moved and called to each other, Not in language, the prion had stripped that out within the first 48 hours of full conversion, but in a high, thin vocalization, something between a shriek and a sustained breath that carried enormous distances. They made this sound constantly. It was the sound of the brainstem doing everything the brainstem does, communicating threat, communicating location, communicating hunger. At night, when our warehouse was dark and silent, they were quiet. But any noise, a dropped object, would a cough we tried to muffle against a sleeve, and within seconds you could hear the response outside. A swelling of that thin vocalization, the sound of feet on concrete, the test of the door. We learned to move like the air moved, slowly, deliberately, without impact. We unlearned 30 years of human noisiness in 2 weeks. I had packed slippers, rubber-soled, cheap ones from Walmart, 20 pairs, because I'd thought of this. We wore them at all times inside the warehouse. No heel strike on concrete. We communicated with hand signals I'd developed and taught over the previous year. Come here, danger, listen, wait, now, no. We ate cold food when we could. The camp stove, a Coleman 2-burner running off a propane bottle, we used only once per day, only at midday, venting through the chimney pipe with the damper open and the pipe extended 3 feet above the roofline, so the smell diffused into the air rather than sitting at a ground level. By the end of January, the sounds outside had changed in character. Less constant, more directional. The static were, I don't want to say learning, because learning implies cognition, and the prion had burned cognition out, but adapting. Responding to the patterns of their environment. The ones that habitually chased lights were the ones that eventually got killed by the power surges when the grid went into its final death spasms. The ones that survived were the quiet hunters, the ones who used the hearing sensitivity as a weapon rather than responding to it as a reflex. My mother noted this one morning. She'd been logging observations in a small spiral notebook every day, the kind of systematic record-keeping she'd brought from her hospital career. "They're quieter in the mornings now," she said, showing me the log. Last week there was a consistent vocalization pattern between 6 and 8 a.m. This week, significantly less. I looked at the log. She was right. They're modifying behavior in response to... I stopped. In response to a stimulus that was killing them. She said, "Something is still working in there." "Not enough," I said. She put the notebook away. "No, not enough." Emma and I did not talk about the trestle for 2 months. There was too much else. Every day was triage, the running of the systems, the maintenance of the silence, the rotation of food stocks, the health monitoring, the radio watch. The ham set had started picking up scattered transmissions within a week. National Guard communications, then civilian emergency frequencies, then, as those faded, individual ham operators broadcasting into the air, because broadcasting into the air was the only way left to know you weren't completely alone. We logged every transmission, triangulated positions where we could, built a map of who was still out there and where, and for how long. What the map told us, by the end of February, was grim. The eastern seaboard had the highest density of conversion. The water treatment plants had served concentrated urban populations. The Midwest was better. Rural areas were sporadic. Montana and Wyoming had minimal impact. Canada north of the border was functioning still, though with significant disruption, and it was worldwide. The virus had gotten into the international water supply chain before anyone understood what they were dealing with. Europe, Asia, Australia. Less severe, different infrastructure, different exposure timing, but present. It was not the end of humanity, but it was the end of the world as any of us had known it. Emma asked me about the trestle on a Tuesday night in March. We were on the mezzanine. My mother was asleep on her cot, the slow, deep breathing of genuine sleep. Emma and I were lying on our backs, 6 inches apart on the platform looking at the dark ceiling, the way we'd ended up most nights. Too tired to sleep, too wired to stop thinking. "You had the detonator in your hand," she said. "Yeah." "Huh. The train was coming." "Yeah." "And you threw it?" "Yeah." A long pause. "Because of me," she said. I saw you under the trestle. I drove out there to tell you to come back, that it wasn't worth—" She stopped, started again. "I thought you might do something that would. I didn't want you to do something you couldn't come back from." I looked at the ceiling. "The thing is," she said, "you'd spent 5 years preparing for this. 5 years of your life, everything, and then in, what, 5 seconds? 3 seconds, I said. In 3 seconds, you threw all of it away." I didn't say anything. "Why?" she said. I turned my head and looked at her in the dark. I could see the outline of her face, the shape of her. "You know why," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "That was a terrible trade," she said, "by any rational measure." "Yeah, billions of people." "I know." "And you'd do it again," she said. Not a question. I looked back at the ceiling. "Don't ask me that," I said. She didn't say anything else. But her hand found mine on the platform between us, and she held on. Like mother. Just held on. Chapter 12. Spring. March and April were about survival math. The generator ran 6 hours per night for heat. The temperature inside the unheated warehouse dropped to 40 degrees on the coldest nights. 6 hours of generator time burned approximately 1.5 gallons of treated fuel. At that rate, we had roughly 4 months of heating season fuel remaining before summer made it unnecessary. We stretched it. 4 hours some nights, 3 on the mildest. I tracked every tenth of a gallon. Food was adequate. I had planned for 4 people for 18 months, and we were 3 people. We were running ahead of projection on calories, but behind on variety. I'd packed primarily for calorie density, not nutritional range. By March, we were all showing early signs of vitamin deficiency. Emma's gums were tender. My mother had developed persistent dry skin rash along her forearms. I started rationing the remaining multivitamins, which I'd stocked in abundance, thank God, more aggressively. Water was the most stable system. The roof collection, combined with stored reserve, kept us easily supplied. I had more water than I needed. I thanked myself for the obsessiveness in retrospect. The first survivor contact was in April. It came on 40 meters, the ham frequency that carries longest under normal ionospheric conditions. I was on the late watch, 3 in the morning, when the signal punched through. Any station, this is KD8VTQ operating from the Pittsburgh Hill District. We have 18 survivors at the old Jefferson School building. We need medical assistance. We have injured. Over. I wrote down the call sign and the location. 18 people. The Jefferson School was 2.5 miles north. I woke Emma. She read the log entry. Then she looked at me. "Medical assistance," she said. "We don't have the capacity to treat a group that size, not without depleting our reserves." "I know. If we invite them here, 18 people increases our noise signature, our food draw, our Jules." I stopped. "There are 18 people in the Jefferson School building," she said. I rubbed my face. "I know. So what do we do?" I looked at the radio. At the call sign I'd written in the log, "We respond," I said, "and we figure out the rest from there." She nodded, pulled her sleeping bag up around her shoulders, watching me compose the response. "Some things you can't plan for. Some decisions can't be made in advance. You have to be in the moment with them and do what your gut says is right." That was the first time I trusted Emma's gut instead of my plan. It would not be the last. Chapter 13. The scratch. I want to talk about the night Emma got hurt, because I've spent 20 years trying to find the right way to say it, and there isn't one. There's just the sequence of events and the weight of them, and the way the world can change in a second. It was May. We had made contact with the Jefferson School group and established a protocol. Voice contact on the ham at 0600 daily, no physical meeting until the immediate perimeter was secure. Their situation was deteriorating. 2 of their 18 had been converted in a group that had sheltered at a church 4 blocks away, and they'd lost 3 people to conversion in the subsequent chaos before the survivors managed to seal themselves in. Their medical situation was the immediate problem. 1 serious laceration that needed suturing, 1 potential appendicitis, 2 children with fevers that weren't breaking. Emma pushed for physical contact. I delayed it. We went back and forth on this for a week. Me with the operational security argument, her with the human cost argument. She was right. I knew she was right. But I was afraid of the noise discipline problem that came with moving two people through streets that had active static in them. On the 14th of May, I gave in. We planned the run in detail. 0200, the quietest window. The route using the rail right-of-way, which ran parallel to the main street, but was screened by a berm that provided sound masking. Two people, me and Emma. My mother was the oldest and the option with the most operational value inside the warehouse. We'd carry a small kit, suturing materials, antibiotics, children's fever reducers, full noise discipline. No talking, hand signals only. We went in black, dark clothing, no reflective materials, headlamps switched off, moving by the ambient light of the cloud-diffused moon. The outbound run was clean. We made the Jefferson School in 48 minutes. The contact was a man named Curtis, former paramedic, 50 years old, built like a retired linebacker, who opened the door with the careful efficiency of someone who had been living on high alert for 4 months. He was quietly grateful, in the way that people are grateful when gratitude has worn past expression into something simpler and more permanent. Emma sutured the laceration, a 4-inch gash on a teenage boy's forearm, in 17 minutes. She checked the suspected appendix and determined it was likely a pulled muscle, which was the better answer by every measure. The children's fevers she evaluated, administered the appropriate dose of pediatric ibuprofen we'd brought, and gave Curtis detailed written instructions for monitoring. We were back in the stairwell at 0357. The return run was when it happened. 3 blocks from the warehouse on the rail right-of-way, there was a section where the berm dropped to track level and the route crossed an old switching yard. I'd scouted this section. There were no obstacles in the path I'd chosen. What I had not fully accounted for was the derelict freight car that had been pushed off the secondary siding by something, storm wind or the weight of the winter ice on the roof, and had shifted 6 feet into the main path since my last reconnaissance. I went around it fine. Long stride, left hand bracing against the side of the car, around in silence. Emma was right behind me. She went around the car the same way I did. Her left hand braced against the car body the same way mine did. And somewhere in the rotting wooden side panel of that freight car, there was a jagged nail or a strip of torn corrugated metal that caught her palm as she braced. She made no sound. That was the discipline. She made absolutely no sound. We got back to the warehouse. I threw the bolt. My mother was already at the door. In the light of the battery-powered lantern, I saw Emma's left hand, a cut across the palm, maybe 2 inches, with the characteristic torn-edge pattern of a rusty metal edge, bleeding freely. My mother got the medical kit. I got the irrigation syringe. We worked fast, cleaned it, sutured it. Emma did her own suturing, 3 stitches, steadier than I would have been. Antibiotic cream, sterile dressing. It was a cut on the hand. People cut their hands all the time. But a week later, the fever started. It wasn't fast. That was the thing about the prion variant. It wasn't fast like a bite, where the acute symptoms hit within hours. The conversion was a slow-motion devastation. Days of normal function, then headaches, then the confusion, then the gradual replacement of personality with something else. I knew what I was watching. I had watched it before. In 2024, I had watched it take 8 people from our compound, and each time I had known, about a week in, that the person was already gone, even when they were still able to talk, still able to ask questions, still present in their body, but increasingly absent in everything that made them themselves. Emma noticed it before she would admit it. She came to me on the 12th day, sat across from me at the workbench, looked at me with the specific quality of attention she always brought to hard conversations. "I need you to tell me honestly," she said. I looked at her. "How much time?" she said. I looked at my hands on the table. Jewels. "Adi, a few days," I said, "of yourself, of being you." She absorbed this. And then it gets harder to track. The Reasoning goes first, then recognition, then everything that requires sustained, conscious effort. She was quiet for a moment. Does it hurt? The headaches are bad. The confusion is disorienting. After that, I stopped. I don't think there's enough left to experience suffering. She nodded slowly. Okay, she said. One word, okay. She was the most extraordinary person I have ever known, and she said okay to her own death in a tone that had no self-pity in it at all, only the calm of someone deciding to face what they had to face. Chapter 14. The Glass Room. The isolation room was in the northeast corner of the mezzanine. I had built it in 1998. 4 walls of 3/8-inch polycarbonate sheeting, the kind used in industrial safety applications, clear enough to see through, strong enough to resist sustained impact. A steel door with a sliding bolt, operable from outside only. Ventilation through a sealed 4-inch port with a mesh screen. I had built it because I'd known this moment was coming. I had built it, and I had not told Emma about it, and I had not told myself why I hadn't told her, and now I had to tell her. She stood in front of it and looked at it for a long time. "When did you build this?" she asked. "Before you came," I said. She turned and looked at me, not with accusation. With the flat, clear look that was her way of asking for the complete truth. "I knew someone would need it eventually," I said. "I built it for exactly this reason, in case—" I stopped. "In case I couldn't protect everyone from everything." "In case you couldn't protect me," she said. "In case I couldn't protect anyone." She looked at the room again, at the clear polycarbonate walls, at the cot inside made up with a clean blanket. The books I'd put there, 3 of them, ones she'd mentioned she'd always meant to read, the lantern, the bottle of water. "You prepared for this," she said. "I prepared for everything I could think of." She was quiet. "Did you prepare for how you'd feel standing here right now?" she asked. "No," I thought. "No, I did not prepare for that." "I'll be fine," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stepped inside. She turned around and sat on the cot and looked at me through the polycarbonate. "I know why you threw the detonator," she said. I didn't answer. "I know it was the wrong choice," she said, "by every measure that matters. Emma, I need to say this while I can still say it." Her voice was steady. "I know what you gave up. I know what's out there because of what you did. I've known for months. I've thought about it every day. Emma, please, and I need you to know that I'm not sorry. I can't make myself be sorry that I'm alive, even now. Even knowing what now costs." She paused. "But you have to finish this. You have to find a way out of this loop. You understand what I mean." I understood what she meant. I'd been thinking about the machine since March, about what it would take to build it, about whether the mathematics of the quantum resonance I'd used in 2024, the government's prototype that I'd barely understood, could be reconstructed from first principles over 30 years with what I could source. I looked at her through the polycarbonate, my hands against the clear wall. "I'll bolt it from outside when—" I couldn't finish. "I know," she said. "Go." I bolted the door on the 16th day. She was still herself on the 16th day, mostly. She was confused sometimes. She got lost in the middle of sentences, but the eyes were still hers, and she knew me. And when I slid the bolt, she put one hand flat against the polycarbonate and held it there. I held my hand against the other side. We stayed like that for a long time. Then she sat back on the cot and picked up one of the books. And I went downstairs and sat at the workbench in the quiet of the warehouse and felt the full weight of every choice I'd ever made land on me at once. My mother found me an hour later. She sat down across from me without a word. She put a cup of coffee on the table. Folgers, black. The same red mug she'd been using since 1994. I drank it. She didn't say anything. She didn't try to give me anything or take anything away. She just sat there in the particular silence of someone who is very good at being present. After a long time, she said, "What do you need to do next?" I stared at the table. "Build something," I said. "Then build it," she said. She got up and took her mug and went back to her cot. I got out the yellow legal pad and began. Chapter 15. Year 8, October 2008. 8 years in. I want to tell you about a single afternoon in October of 2008 because it contains everything the middle years were. Curtis and I went for a supply run to the Home Depot on Penn Avenue. We'd identified it the previous winter as a target. Paint cans, copper wire, PVC fittings, lumber if any of the interior storage had stayed dry. 9 years of weather and static had done damage to the building, but the cinder block shell was intact. We'd done 4 reconnaissance passes and established that the immediate territory was held by a cluster of 8 to 12 static that had been dormant territorial for at least a year. The kind that had found a food source somewhere in the building and weren't moving. The kind you could work around if you were quiet. We went in at 10 in the morning. The October light was flat and white. I had the Mossberg on a sling under my coat. Curtis had a crossbow. We'd given up on firearms for close work years ago. A single shot would pull everything in the earshot, and earshot in 2008 meant a 2-block radius minimum. The loading dock doors were pried open, which meant someone had been there before us. Recent, the rust on the bent latch was orange, not black. Curtis clocked it too. We stopped in the doorway and listened for 2 full minutes. Nothing. We went in. The interior was dark except for the hole in the roof above what used to be the lumber section. A 10-foot wide collapse that let in a cone of gray light. The smell inside was insulation foam and rot and something that had died in the wall cavity, which is a very specific smell that I will never stop knowing. Water damage had caved in the drop ceiling along the west wall, and the tiles lay in damp piles that had grown their own ecosystem over a decade. We went to hardware first. Curtis went high for wire, and I went low for fittings. I was on my knees in the plumbing aisle, pulling brass gate valves off the bottom rack when I heard it. Not the thin vocalization of the static, something else. Crying. A child. Low and exhausted, the way children cry when they've been doing it too long. Not the sharp distress cry, but the grinding, depleted sound of a kid who has been scared for hours and has run out of the energy for the acute part. I looked at Curtis across the aisle. He had heard it too. He was already scanning toward the sound. The crying was coming from the contractor checkout area at the back of the store, behind the sliding steel security gate that was half closed and frozen that way by rust. I moved toward it. Curtis came parallel, crossbow up. Behind the gate, 2 kids, a girl maybe 8 years old, and a boy who was younger, 5, maybe 6. Both filthy. Both wrapped in a drop cloth that someone had pulled off a paint display pallet and fashioned into a rough blanket. The girl had her arm around the boy. She was the one who'd been crying. When she saw us, she stopped immediately, and her face went completely still in the particular way that meant she'd learned that making noise was dangerous. Smart kid. I crouched down to their level. I did it slowly so she could see I wasn't rushing. "Where are the adults?" I said, barely above a whisper. She pointed toward the garden center at the far end of the store. I looked at Curtis. He nodded. We found the adults in the garden center. 2 of them, a man and a woman, both around 30, both static converted. They'd been converted recently enough that the physical deterioration was minimal, maybe 6 months in, but recent enough that there was nothing left behind the eyes. They were sitting in the corner among the dead potted plants, quiet in the way the static went quiet when they had no stimulus. When I came through the doorway, they turned their heads simultaneously, tracking the sound of my footstep. I stood there and looked at the man and the woman and thought about the 2 kids behind the security gate who had watched their parents convert and had stayed with them anyway because they were 8 and 5 years old and they didn't know what else to do. Curtis came up beside me. We stood there for a moment. "I'll do it," Curtis said, quietly. "I've got it." He put a hand on my arm. "Jules, I've got it." I went back to the kids. The girl watched me come back through the store toward her. She was reading my face with an accuracy that was painful, the particular skill of a child who has been living in a dangerous situation long enough to become expert at reading adults. When I crouched down again, she saw something in my face and her chin went tight. "They're not going to get better," I said. She already knew. That was the worst part. She already knew. Her name was Nadia. Her brother's name was Theo. They'd been in the Home Depot for 4 days. They had eaten 3 granola bars and a box of chalk that Theo had thought was food. I carried Theo on my back the 6 blocks to the warehouse. He weighed about as much as a bag of rice, and he held on with both arms around my neck and didn't make a sound the entire way. That is what the middle years were. Not the systems, not the supply inventories and the generator hours and the water test strips. Those existed, and they mattered, and they kept people alive. But the texture of those years, what they actually felt like from the inside, was Nadia reading my face in a dark hardware store. Theo holding on without a sound. Curtis handling the thing I should have handled. The network grew in that period because the world kept producing people who had nobody left. By 2010, we had 31. By 2015, we had 44. We lost people too, always, consistently. The price that no amount of preparation could eliminate. But the net was upward, slow, grinding, upward. Nadia grew up in the warehouse. By 2015, she was training the newest arrivals in noise discipline. By 2020, she was Curtis's second in command, which was not a title we'd invented, but a function she'd assumed so gradually that one day I looked up and realized it had been true for years. Theo, when he was old enough, started maintaining the radio equipment. He had a gift for it. He could hear things in the static that the rest of us couldn't. Small signals, distant, faint. He'd sit at the Kenwood for hours with his eyes half closed and his head tilted, finding people. I thought sometimes that this was what the world was now. Not the world I'd known, not the world I'd tried to save and failed to save. Something else. Something smaller and harder and organized around different principles. The principle of, we are still here. The principle of, we heard you on the radio. Come in from the cold. I thought about this. I tried not to think about what I had paid for it. Chapter 16. What the Machine Requires. The quantum resonance work started in 2004. I had 4 things to work with. 1. My memory of the government prototype from 2024. I'd been in the facility for less than 3 hours before everything collapsed and I triggered the machine. But I'd looked at it with the attentiveness of a man who knew he was going to need to reconstruct it. I'd memorized the primary coil configuration, the resonator geometry, the pulse timing, the basic principle. That consciousness, under certain electromagnetic conditions, could be induced to shift longitudinal position along its own timeline. 2. The technical library I'd assembled. Not specifically for this purpose. I hadn't planned to build the machine when I first stocked the library, but the physics periodicals I'd collected, the engineering manuals, the mathematics texts, the university library system had been fully operational until 2001, and I'd made extensive use of it. 3. The material resources of the warehouse and the network. Metal stock, wire, salvage electronics. The ham radio components alone gave me a starting point for the electromagnetic architecture. 4. Time. I had nothing but time. The first 8 years were theory. I filled 47 legal pads with calculations, threw out most of them, started again. The core problem with the quantum approach was energy. The government prototype in 2024 had drawn on a dedicated nuclear power source. I had generators running on treated gasoline. The math for bridging that gap was brutal. The breakthrough, and I use that word carefully, because what it actually was a series of small incremental clarifications that accumulated into something, came in 2012 from an unlikely source. Curtis had salvaged a set of technical journals from a university physics building in Oakland, the Carnegie Mellon area, which had retained relatively functional structures because of its stone construction. Among the journals was a 1998 paper by a physicist at MIT who'd been exploring quantum tunneling at the macro scale. The paper was theoretical, borderline fringe, the kind of work that gets published in small circulation journals because the mainstream doesn't know what to do with it. The paper proposed that the energy requirement for consciousness displacement could be reduced by orders of magnitude if the temporal target was fixed, meaning you weren't choosing where to go, only when. And the when was constrained to a moment along your own subjective timeline that the consciousness had already occupied. I read it 3 times. Then I put it down and sat with it. Then I read it again. If the paper was right, and I had reason to believe it was because I had lived proof that the displacement was possible, the energy requirement for my purposes might be within reach. Not comfortable reach, not easy reach, but possible. I went back to the legal pads. Construction began in 2016. By 2016, my mother was 79 years old and still running the radio watch every morning with the same methodical precision she'd brought to it for 16 years. Her arthritis was worse. She moved slowly. But her mind was as sharp as it had ever been, and she maintained the log with the exactitude of a scientist. I had a machine skeleton by the end of 2017. I had the primary coil wound from salvaged copper wire, the resonator chamber built from the best materials I could get from the network, steel, copper, high-grade insulating ceramic from a salvaged transformer station. The geometry was approximate. The timing electronics were built from scratch using a combination of salvaged and jury-rigged components that I was approximately 60% confident would work. The remaining 40% was the thing I tried not to think about in the middle of the night. My mother died in 2019. She had been declining for about a year. Nothing acute, everything gradually. Her heart, her kidneys. The slow accumulation of aging in a body that had managed well for 79 years and was now reaching the limits of what even methodical maintenance could sustain. She died in the mezzanine on a Tuesday morning, in her cot, with me holding her hand. She said 2 things at the end. The first was, "I believe you did your best." The second was a quiet noise that meant she was leaving, and then she was gone. I sat with her for a long time. Then I got up and went downstairs. I worked on the machine, because that was all there was left. Chapter 17. The Last Stand. May 2024. 24 years since the fall. 24 years in this warehouse, in this city, in this grinding, reduced life that bore approximately no resemblance to the world I'd grown up in or the world I'd come from. The network, Curtis's original group, expanded and contracted a dozen times over 2 decades, numbered 41 people now, spread across 5 sites within the cooperative perimeter. We had running water from a repaired municipal supply line that a plumber named Ramirez had kept operational for 12 years. We had a rotating crop system that fed 200 calories per person per day, in addition to the stored supply. We had lost, over 24 years, 37 people to conversion, 11 to injury, 9 to illness, and 4 to things that don't need naming. We had kept 63 alive through everything. The machine was almost ready, but the outer perimeter had been failing for 6 months. The static population had never disappeared. In 20 years, it had reduced dramatically in our immediate area between the network's defensive activity and the natural attrition of the converted population. But further out, beyond the industrial zone, there were regions where the density had never dropped, and something had changed in the behavioral pattern in the last year. Less territorial, more directional, moving toward the remaining human settlements with a coherence that was deeply disturbing to watch. Curtis called it a migration. I didn't have a better word. By April 2024, the eastern perimeter was compromised. By the end of April, we'd lost Site 3 in the Hill District. A full evacuation, 11 people, all made it out, and consolidated to the remaining 4 sites plus the warehouse. By the middle of May, the consolidated perimeter was holding by the thinnest margin. I ran the numbers every morning. We had weeks, not months. I had 1 component left to source for the machine. A specific high-voltage capacitor bank, the final stage of the pulse circuit that I had not been able to build from available materials and which existed, according to my best reconstruction of the technical specifications, in a university laboratory that had been structurally intact since 2000. The laboratory was 3 miles away, through the thickest static concentration in the operative area. Curtis came to me 2 weeks before the end. He sat at the workbench, the same workbench I'd used for 20 years, and looked at me the way only Curtis could look at you. Direct, unsentimental, carrying more patience than most people manage in a lifetime. "Tell me about the machine," he said. I told him. He listened, asked 3 questions. 2 were technical, clarifying the mechanism, the risk factors, the probability of success. 1 was not technical. "When you get back there," he said, "if you get back, what do you do differently?" "I detonate the charges," I said. "I don't wait. I don't go to the trestle. I rig the detonator to a timer and I trigger it from a mile away at 11:52 and I don't let anything interfere with it." "And the girl?" I looked at the workbench. "Jules. She won't be on the trestle," I said. "This time she won't." Curtis was quiet for a moment. "And if she is?" I said nothing. 24 years, he said. "And you do it again." "Don't ask me that." "I'm asking." I looked at him, at this man who had given everything he had to keeping 63 people alive for 24 years and was asking me a question he already knew the answer to. "I don't know," I said. He nodded once, as if this was the right answer, as if not knowing was the most honest thing I could say. I went for the capacitor bank 3 days later. I made it there and I made it back. I am not going to dwell on the details of the route because some things deserve to stay in the dark they happened in. I will say I used the nail gun to good effect in 2 separate engagements. I will say I came back with the capacitor bank and a horizontal cut across the left side of my rib cage from a chain-link fence corner that I needed 12 stitches to close, stitched by a woman named Patterson who had trained under Emma's protocols. I came back, and the next 17 days I spent finishing the machine. The machine was not impressive to look at. It was roughly the shape and size of a phone booth. A steel frame welded at every joint, bolted to a poured concrete pad I'd laid in the warehouse floor in 2016 in anticipation. The primary coil wound around the frame, 47 turns of 12-gauge copper, wound in a very specific helical pattern that I'd derived from the MIT paper and spent 2 years refining. The resonator chamber at the center, a cylindrical volume approximately the size of a man standing with his arms at his sides, faced with copper and ceramic laminate, insulated to the specifications I'd worked out over 6 years of calculation. The capacitor bank, the piece I'd nearly died retrieving, mounted in the base, charged by the full output of both generators running simultaneously. 1 shot. The capacitors would discharge completely on activation and could not be recharged with available resources. 1 shot. I ran diagnostics for 3 days. On the 3rd day, everything checked. Circuit continuity, charge retention, timing synchronization. 1 shot. The eastern wall of the outer perimeter fell on May 8, 2024. Curtis radioed at 02:15. "Site 1 is pulling back to the warehouse. We have a full breach on the east side. Numbers are..." A pause. "Numbers are significant." "How long to the warehouse?" 40 minutes if we move now, less if we don't wait for everyone." "You wait for everyone," I said. They made it. All 14 from Site 1. They were inside before 03:30. The consolidated group was now 33 people in the warehouse. The walls held. The silence held. But outside, the sound was building in a way I hadn't heard since January of 2000. The tide of the static migration was hitting the building. I had 24 hours, maybe less, so I spent 12 of them on the machine. Final adjustments, the load sequence, the timing of the capacitor discharge relative to the resonance pulse. I spent 4 of them writing, not a letter, a technical document, everything I knew about the machine, the mathematics, the construction, everything that might help someone else build it if I failed. I sealed it in a waterproof case and gave it to Curtis with instructions for where to store it. And then, in the last hour, I went through the warehouse one final time. The canned goods wall, half depleted now but still substantial, 20 years of careful management. The tool rack, the medical station, the radio set, the mezzanine. I went up the mezzanine ladder. I stood in the glass room. The cot was empty and made. The books were still there. The 3 I'd put in before the door closed. 2 of them still had her bookmarks in them. She'd made it halfway through both. I stood there. Then I went back down. Chapter 18. The document. The outer wall came down at 0337 on May 12, 2024. The noise was the first sign. The vocalization swell building outside. Directional, multiple source, converging on the warehouse from east and south. The building shuddered once, something massive hitting the exterior. Then again. Curtis had everyone away from the exterior walls and concentrated in the center of the warehouse. 33 people, quiet, waiting. The noise discipline we'd all lived with for 24 years holding even now. I was at the machine. The capacitors were at full charge, generators running. The resonator was warm. I could feel it through the copper frame, a vibration in a frequency range that wasn't quite audible. Curtis came and stood beside me. "Time," he said. "Now is fine," I said. "You know what I'm going to say." "Don't." "Jules." I turned and looked at him. This man, 53 years old, built from 24 years of exactly this. A paramedic from the Hill District who'd turned himself into something more useful than anything his formal training had prepared him for. "You did everything you could," he said. "Not everything," I said. He put a hand on my shoulder, left it there for a moment, then stepped back. I turned to the machine. The door, a steel frame with the contact points built into the threshold, was closed. I had to open it, step in, close it from inside, and then trigger the discharge. 6 seconds from open to trigger. The discharge would happen. Where I went from there was the mathematics. I put my hand on the door. Then I stopped. There was a cardboard box on the floor next to the machine base. I'd put it there when I'd moved everything out of the warehouse's original equipment storage to make room for the concrete pad in 2016. I hadn't opened it since. I don't know what made me open it now. Nothing rational. Call it the instinct of someone about to make a journey that can't be undone. I opened the box. Old papers. Equipment manuals. The first generation of my technical notes from 2004. Under all of it, a manila folder. The label in handwriting I recognized as Curtis's said, "Site Analysis, Polaris 9, Incident, Sourced Materials, Compiled 2008. I looked at it. I hadn't asked Curtis to compile site analysis on the Polaris 9 incident. I hadn't known this existed. I opened the folder. Curtis had assembled it from fragments, University Geological Survey records, chemical engineering documentation salvaged from the Carnegie Mellon Technical Library, water treatment plant operational records from before the fall, a partial toxicology report from the County Health Department dated November 1999, 2 months before the incident, that someone had been working on before everything stopped. The documents were organized methodically, Curtis-style, tabbed, cross-referenced. I turned to the Chemical Cargo Manifest, the Polaris 9 manifest, photocopied from the rail company's records, partially burned but largely legible, listed the car contents by car number in 3 columns. I read down the list. Grain cars, timber loads, general freight. I got to the end of the list. I went back to the beginning and read it again. There was no military chemical compound, no government experiment, no toxic payload. The manifest showed 47 cars of ordinary freight. Agricultural goods, 2 tankers of liquid propane, standard grain loads. At the bottom of the folder, Curtis had attached a handwritten note. It read, cross-referenced against county chemical records, NTSB freight database fragments, and rail company documentation. No hazardous material other than LP tankers. LP explosion accounts for initial fire signature and thermal impact zone. Source of prion variant unknown, not attributable to chemical contamination from Polaris 9. Working theory, external vector. Unknown origin. Still investigating. See, 2008. I stood with the folder in my hands. The outside wall took another impact. Dust, Fell from the ceiling joists. I read the note again. Source of prion variant unknown. Not attributable to chemical contamination from Polaris 9. The Polaris 9 hadn't been carrying the virus. The Polaris 9 had never been carrying the virus. In the version of history I'd been told, in the 2024 that had sent me back, everyone believed the contamination came from the train. That was the foundational assumption. That was the thing that made the trestle the critical intervention point. Stop the train, stop the chemical release, stop the pandemic. But if the train wasn't carrying the virus, if the virus hadn't come from the water treatment plant contamination, I felt the cold come in. The cold of a very bad thought arriving. The quantum drive in the government machine had caused radiation exposure. I knew this. I had decontaminated my clothing after the transit in 2024. But the decontamination was improvised, incomplete. My body carried residual quantum radiation. In 1994, for 5 years walking around Pittsburgh, for 5 years going to the library, driving the delivery truck, working in the warehouse, shaking hands with Dave Kowalski at the bar. For 5 years, shedding trace radiation into the environment. And on December 31st, 1999, the liquid propane tankers on the Polaris 9 had exploded. A large propane fire, an enormous amount of particulate matter and thermal energy released into the atmosphere at ground level. And somewhere in the interaction between the quantum-irradiated particulate matter that had been accumulating in the local environment for 5 years and the sudden thermal plume of the LP explosion, I looked at the resonator chamber, at the copper coils, at the mathematics of what I'd built. I thought about the MIT paper's explanation of how quantum radiation interacts with complex organic molecules at elevated temperatures. I thought about prions, about what a prion was, a misfolded protein, a stable, self-replicating structural error, the kind of molecular event that could be catalyzed by certain forms of radiation exposure combined with thermal stress. I thought about the trail I had left. Across 5 years, across Pittsburgh, the background radiation of a man who had traveled time. The walls shuddered. The vocalization outside was a wall of sound. Now, 33 people sat in silence in the center of the room. I thought about the version of me who was, right now, sleeping in a bedroom on Milford Street in Pittsburgh in 1994, dreaming, probably, young, not yet knowing what was coming. And I thought about what I was carrying back with me. The quantum radiation that I had not been able to fully decontaminate before my transit, the radiation that had been embedded in my cellular structure for 30 years, the radiation I would carry back into 1994, the moment I stepped into the machine. If I stepped into the machine and went back to 1994 and walked around Pittsburgh for 5 years again, the same radiation would be there again, in the same environment, and the Polaris 9 would go off the tracks again, maybe because of my explosive charges, maybe because I found another way to derail it, maybe because something else went wrong on a train carrying 47 cars of ordinary freight on a winter night. Propane tankers always exploded eventually, and the particulate plume from that explosion would interact with 5 years of quantum background radiation from a time traveler's body again. And the prion would form again, because the prion had always formed, not because of the train's cargo, because of me. I was not trying to stop the pandemic. I was the pandemic. I had always been the pandemic. And every time I went back, every time a version of me sat in this machine and pulled the trigger, another loop began. Another Julian Vance walked around Pittsburgh for 5 years, shedding the quantum signature that would eventually, inevitably, interact with an LP explosion and seed the air with a misfolded protein that would tear civilization down. The loop didn't start with the train. The loop started with me stepping into a machine. Every time. Chapter 19. The Snake. I stood at the machine door with the folder in my hands. The outer wall shuddered again. Concrete dust sifted down from the ceiling joists in a slow curtain. I read the page again. Source of prion variant unknown. Not attributable to chemical contamination from Polaris 9. I set the folder on top of the machine. I pressed both palms flat against it, against the cold steel cover. I stood there. There is a specific kind of silence that arrives when the thing you've believed for 30 years turns out to be wrong. It isn't the silence of surprise. It's the silence of a load-bearing wall coming down. Everything that was resting on that wall comes down with it. I believe the Polaris 9 carried the virus. That belief was the foundation. Stop the train, stop the virus, save the world. That was why I went back. That was why I spent 5 years building a warehouse full of canned goods. That was why I stood on a trestle with 48 ounces of vodka and a detonator on New Year's Eve. The Polaris 9 never carried anything but grain and propane. I was the only thing in Pittsburgh in 1994 that didn't belong there. I thought about the quantum radiation. About 5 years of it bleeding from my body into the air, into the soil, into the particulate layer of an industrial city, invisible, cumulative. Exactly the kind of low-level contamination that wouldn't show up in any test anyone thought to run because no one in 1994 or 1999 or 2003 had a reason to look for quantum radiation. Because quantum radiation didn't exist in the civilian world. Except on the body of a man who had stepped out of a machine in 2024 and woken up in a bedroom on Milford Street with a crack in the ceiling and Nirvana on the radio. The LP tankers on the Polaris 9 had exploded because a freight train carrying 47 cars had derailed in a controlled demolition on New Year's Eve, 1999. I had set those charges. Even when I threw the handset into the creek, the charges were still on the columns. When the train went through at speed and the Victorian ironwork, already rated for less than the load it was carrying, finally gave way on the eastern span, I heard it go. That sound I'd attributed to stress failure, I remembered it clearly. The deep groan from the trestle while the train was still crossing. The eastern span had come down after the locomotive was through, after the last car had passed. 40 feet of iron, falling onto 2 LP tankers that had already left the crossing. The fireball, the particulate cloud. 9 years of my quantum radiation in the soil, and the air reacting with the thermal event. A protein misfold that turned into a template, that turned into a replicating agent, that turned into the end of the world. I had not failed to stop the pandemic, I had caused it by trying to stop it. Every version of me, every Jules Vance who had ever stepped into a machine and woken up to Nirvana and Tide had gone back to Pittsburgh with quantum radiation baked into his cells, had spent 5 years contaminating the environment, and had ultimately caused the LP explosion that triggered the prion cascade. The loop didn't start with the pandemic. The loop started with me. I was the Ouroboros. I was the snake biting its own tail. And I was standing at a machine that would send me back to do it again. The northeast wall made a sound I hadn't heard before. Not impact, tearing, anchor bolts pulling out of concrete in sequence, each one a small pop, feeding the next. Curtis moving, quiet, controlled, Nadia at the south end. 33 people compressing toward the center without a word. I looked at the machine. If I stepped in, radiation goes back with me. 5 years of contamination, LP explosion, prion cascade, same world, same warehouse, same glass room. Emma dies the same way. And at the end of it, another version of me finds this folder, reads this note, stands at this machine. Forever. If I stayed, no version of me in 1994. No contamination. Maybe the Polaris 9 derails anyway. Propane tankers, bad track as winter ice, but nothing to interact with. No prion, no pandemic. Emma Reyes, somewhere in that world, 50 years old, fine. All I had to do was not step in. The northeast wall came apart. 4 feet of steel sheeting folding inward. The sound of it like a car hitting a wall. Light and cold air. And then the vocalization. The static surging in response to the impact, rising in a wave and pouring through the breach like water. The nearest one through the gap was moving fast, head down, locked on sound. Curtis stepped in front of it, crossbow bolt in his hand, just the bolt, no bow. and he put it through the base of its skull with 24 years of practice behind the motion. Down. He was already at the next one. I looked at him, at the machine, at the breach. Emma, I thought. Not the Emma who died, the one who might still be alive in a world I hadn't contaminated. The one who didn't know me and was fine because she didn't know me. A second static through the gap, Curtis on it. A third. Nadia, I thought, her face in a dark hardware store. The chin going tight. She already knew. My hand found the machine door. I was not the man who stayed. I had never been that man. Every choice in this warehouse, every can of Spam, every weld, every legal pad filled with equations had Emma at the center of it. Not the world. Her. I knew what I was. I'd known since the trestle. The disease wasn't the prion. It was me. I opened the door. Curtis saw me across the room, through the noise and the bodies and the breach. His face said everything and nothing. No time for anything else. I stepped inside. I closed the door. The coils came alive. The chamber filled with the coherence, that specific pressure that wasn't quite sound, and then the capacitors discharged and the light. Chapter 20. Smells like teen spirit. The smell of the future is burning meat. That smell I had carried in my sinuses for 30 years, like a squatter that wouldn't leave. But the thing that woke me up, Tide laundry detergent. I lay still. I didn't move. Selling. White paint. A hairline crack running northeast from the corner. My hands. I looked at my hands. No scar across the right knuckles. No missing joint on the left index finger. Smooth skin. 25 years old. From the cassette player on the desk, Kurt Cobain was screaming. Load up on guns. Bring your friends. I sat up. My head was ringing. My chest was tight, the particular tightness of a man carrying something enormous in a space too small for it. I knew where I was. I knew when I was. May 12th, 1994. Downstairs, my mother was making coffee. I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at my hands, and I thought about Curtis, about the crossbow bolt in his hand and the efficiency of 24 years, about Nadia at the south end, running the noise discipline with the calm of someone born into it. About Theo at the radio, hearing signals no one else could find. About the warehouse, about what it smelled like at 3 in the morning when everyone else was asleep. About Emma Reyes, the green canvas jacket. Her hand flat against the polycarbonate in the dark. I thought about the folder, about what it said, about what I was. I reached to the cassette player and turned it off. The room was quiet. I got up, I walked to the desk. I sat down. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer, a Bic pen. I sat there for a moment, looking at the blank page. Then I picked up the pen and I wrote, May 12th, 1994. The train is not the problem. I am the problem. My radiation. 5 years of it in the soil. I have to find a way to contain it, shield myself, or... I stopped writing. I sat there, or... The word sat in the middle of the yellow page and asked its question. Or what? Or stay in the house and never go outside? Shield an entire human body from quantum radiation bleed-off using what materials exactly? Decontaminate yourself using a procedure that had never been invented because the problem had never existed before? I put the pen down. I looked at the hairline crack in the ceiling. I had had this thought before. This exact thought. I was certain of it, not the memory of it, I didn't have that, but the feeling of it, the shape of the realization, the way the word or sat on the page and led nowhere good. How many times had I sat in this room? How many iterations of this same morning? How many legal pads full of equations that always ended in the same warehouse, the same machine, the same light? I didn't know. I would never know. I picked up the pen. December 31st. 1999. Polaris 9, Conestoga Road, Trestle. 11:52 p.m. I have to stop the train. I wrote it down, sir. I would always write it down. Because down in the part that doesn't lie, I already knew. I wasn't going to find a way to contain the radiation. I wasn't going to stay inside for 5 years. I was going to build the warehouse. I was going to meet Emma in the wholesale parking lot in October. I was going to stand on the trestle with a detonator in my hand. And on New Year's Eve, her car was going to be on the crossing below. And I was going to throw the handset into the creek every time. Because that was who I was. That was the only version of Jules Vance that existed, the one who threw the detonator, the one who chose wrong and knew it was wrong and could not stop choosing it, the snake biting its own tail, the loop feeding itself, the cause dressed up as the cure. I have to stop the train, I wrote. Downstairs, my mother called my name. The coffee was ready. End.